overly worried, then that would be a warning sign that I would reach out to that person, having a real conversation. And we'll talk about how do we get help for the someone that's struggling, what are their resources, and how to have that conversation, what language to use later in this presentation. So I think Joe's next.
Thank you, Marianne. I appreciate you all being here this evening. I recognize some of the attendees. A special shout out to those support staff at Conestoga High School and within the Tredyffr and Easttown School District for being here tonight and for the work that you've done tirelessly and over this last year or two, especially. So thanks for being here. And I tend to keep a little bit of my talks extemporaneous because, there's so much of an experiential aspect of the content that I prefer to deliver in these types of talks. So, bear with me sometimes. This point of the presentation is regarding the uniqueness of the suicidal mind. So Marianne just explained in some detail the contributing factors that can lead to a person considering suicide and performing suicidal behavior, as well as some warning signs, some indicators that we as outside observers can notice. Now, I want to begin with a disclaimer that what I'm about to share, I'll come around, but it's not about how well, even in the face of those things, a person who is experiencing suicidal thoughts or behavior looks a certain kind of way, right? So, and that's not to say that regardless of what we may think, there's really nothing that we can do at the end of the day. I don't want to leave it in that route, but I think it's important to note that I think the first thing with suicide and in working with grief and death and dying myself, it's a very anxiety-provoking topic for most of us. Some of us, even like myself, I do this every day, but if I take a 2-week vacation, I start to lose, my finger on that pulse, and I kind of slide back into more societal ways of navigating difficult conversations. Certainly, suicidal behavior in our youth is a difficult conversation, and one that we want an answer to, one that when we attend workshops like this, we want to walk away feeling like we have the textbook and the checklist that we're going to go out there and and harass our teens with when they show any of these signs. And believe me, if you want to see them in a normal teen, you're going to find them there. So there is that distinction in knowing your child or knowing your students and understanding what's a demarcation from their typical behavior. Marianne described the health or the mental health aspects, the physical symptomatology through chronic pain, perhaps sleep issues, right? And then the environmental factors such as access and means. Now, if you combine all of those things, right, and you start to see how unique of a picture each teen is, just in their mental health, in their resilience, in their coping, in their friend group, in the strength of their support system at home, or not, right? Are they involved and do they find purpose in hobbies or activities or sports, right? So all of these things are swirling around and contribute to the makeup of a teen. So, just with a modicum of caution that, to consider the warning signs and the contributing factors, but to not, lay it on in a textbook approach to, your child or any other teen that's out there. It looks a little different. An example of that, in my experience, I've unfortunately, though gratefully enough, I've been able to support communities and schools over my time here at Peter's Place after a suicide death. And again, if you wonder like, well, what can we do, or how does it look? I mean, I'll share just a few examples. I think that a more recent one that some people are familiar with is the death of the uh, clinical director at UPenn. That individual was in that position for 6 months, and then died by suicide. And you go, whoa, well, if the director of the counseling center at a, prestigious school, can't understand what he needs, and recognize the signs, then what are we going to do? And I think that just speaks to part of what that mindset is. We want to think like, well, how did they not think of us, or how, like, how could they do this? Didn't they know that they were leaving? Like there is an experience, a reality to the suicidal mind that goes beyond our logical and rational attempt to really understand that. So, and to try to, the fruitless attempt to try to like reason and come up with a reason for that leaves us feeling scared, right? So then we want, okay, well then let me just change this environment up as best as I can, and we're trying to be healthy about it, and we're trying to understand what we can control about it. But part of that is confronting the reality of what we don't understand about it, and what we don't know, maybe what we can't control at the end of the day. It's a very, very tough reality to acknowledge, but a couple other examples just to illustrate the point. There was a mother of two who herself was a very ardent mental health advocate. Story, was very open with her story, and in fact encourages people like myself to share it, posthumously. And she had been undiagnosed with bipolar for a number of years, got it squared away through college with medications, and again embarked upon purposeful living with partnering with emergency responders and police and community organizations, and enhancing awareness around mental health and bipolar and suicidality. Having seen a couple of her presentations, there were slides that were dedicated to, you can't rest. Like you understand this is something that is within you, even on the days where you feel perfectly fine, and then it sneaks up on you. So you always have to be aware of what's going on with you and be able to access what you need to. She had a couple of slides that, indicated an increased likelihood of suicidal behavior in individuals who themselves have witnessed suicidal behavior. So these were in her slides that she dedicated her life to, and died by suicide in her house and was found by her kids. And it's hard to try to say, well, that wasn't on here, but again, and this is not to my disclaimer at the beginning to say at the end of the day, what can we do? I think it's more so to be real and to be honest, and to look at this in all of its unpredictability as well. Last story, and I saved this one for last because it's more pertinent to our demographic of the teenage population, was a 12-year-old boy who, by all accounts, was just a very caring young man. He was very much interested in the world around and in kindness and in spreading that and figuring out ways that he could do that. I believe that, for better or for worse, it was access to, the world events at large over a period of time that led to a feeling of hopelessness in him. In fact, he wrote a letter some period of time before he died, stating as much, that no matter how much he wanted to make a change, it would be a drop in the bucket. And then he died by suicide. So, think of those three different people, think of their, who they were and their trajectory as human beings. And perhaps, when there are those things environmentally, means restriction, things of that nature, access to firearms, proper securing of prescription medication, and all of that. But I think we sometimes maybe stop short there. And I'm not going to get on a pedestal, but I do believe that this is something that's a bit more pervasive within our society, that isn't about talking about the end of the line, which is what I believe means restriction to be. It's like we're talking about it at the end of the line, and it's almost like a one-time deal. And yes, if we get there, then that's what you need to be doing, is paying attention to those things. But I think we're missing it, or we're just leaving with these talks sometimes with just that, and we forget that it's isolation. It's within the teenage population and the preteen population. It's connection with others. It's isolation. It's feelings of overwhelm leading to feelings of hopelessness. And I wonder, are we putting our kids not only in the position to explore their world in a safe way as kids, or are we putting them behind the wheel of, a sports car without a license, and they're just going to crash it? And, again, I'm not going to get on a pedestal. That's another conversation for another day or deeper day. But I think that when feelings of being overwhelmed permeate a regular existence of a preteen and a teen, it will lead to a feeling of hopelessness at the end of the day, or the only thing that they can do, right, is to no longer be part of a world where they cannot affect change and be a change agent. So I say this to school staff when I do professional development trainings, and it's not to demean the importance of secondary school, but for any of you who are familiar with the Ironman race, which is the championships take place in Kona, and the Ironman race is pretty nasty. It's a 2.4 mile swim. I think it's like a 120-mile bike, and then you run a full marathon, like one after the next. And one year I was watching the highlights, and there was a professional that came on and was talking about his strategy and said, well, you can't win the Ironman on the swim, but you can lose it. And I really kind of thought about that, of course, and I internalized it and bring it here today. What he's referring to is that there is no distance ahead that you can get in that first shortest part of the race that will keep you ahead for the duration. But you can go out too hard. You can go out too fast and burn yourself out to where you won't stand a chance. And I think that this part of our kids' lives, the teenage years, is the swim. And I just would love for us to be mindful that, they still have that 120-mile bike and a full marathon after that. And let's just, allow for that a little bit. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. And Michael, without further ado, thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. And I first want to thank Damien Counseling, Marty and Kathleen to put this together, and Marianne as well for your participation tonight. And Joe, thank you for those stories, and I really appreciate it. I had like 2 seconds of technical difficulties. I was able to pop back on, so I'm really sorry about that. So thank you. And this is like the takeaway that I took away so far is this idea that we try to throw logic at something that's illogical. We try to make meaning to something that has no meaning and makes no sense at times. So I start this by saying we try to make sense of some things that are not making sensible. So I come here humble. I come here wanting to learn. I come here to be a part of a conversation that begins tonight. But I think we will want to have more of these conversations. So again, not being afraid to have these conversations, as both presenters so far mentioned in their talks, is a key element of this whole process, and not being afraid to walk into awkward conversations. For some of you know, I'm a substance abuse counselor, and I've been getting more and more into the mental health field because of the calling of what's been happening in our culture and our community in the last couple of years, particularly with COVID, and how, as Marianne said, that idea of isolation has been over talked, but I think it's not understated that isolation within isolation, that comment that you made, is such a critical piece. And there's a differential with COVID, and the kids have all been isolated. We've all been asked to be at home and stay with ourselves and our own thoughts. But there's an extra layer here of isolation that happens, and suicidality and mental health issues. And that's why at Ethos we launched this mental health track, and it's been a real challenge, but a real blessing to be able to serve this population. And when I hear and I sit with folks in pain, and when I'm asking to try to figure out how to be helpful from an individual to a community, I was asked a couple of months ago to speak in Downingtown for the events that happened out there. There were 5 key things in all of my research that I've been doing the last 6 months on this topic. And I shared, and I will share this with the public on our website, on your guys' website, a collection of different resources and collection of different ideas and topics that everybody kind of pulled together from their own research, from their own programs. But one of the simple things that I wanted to talk about, connecting the dots and resourcing folks and families, and to get practical now, is to talk about, what is it that we're getting at and how to be helpful in our communities and our shared communities. And first is a simple thing that you've said so far, is to not be afraid to ask questions, not be afraid to walk away from a difficult conversation, but to lean into the very specifics of, are you thinking about killing yourself? Research shows, again, just by talking about it doesn't make somebody more likely that they're going to commit suicide. And so both panelists are nodding their heads in agreement. So I got their attention so far. So that's good. And if you guys chime in on me, I'm used to adolescent treatment, so you guys can pop in and start talking. Mary Ann, were you going to say something?
Well, AFSP, one of our founding principles is research. And our research tells us that actually, in some cases, when we ask the question, do you have suicidal thoughts? You're actually helping the person. Exactly. Because the suicidal mind is in so much pain. It's excruciating. They no longer have the ability to think clearly. So now you're in this pain, you're thinking about suicide, and now and then there's going to be another layer to that onion. Now you feel ashamed or guilty, or you feel like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I can't tell anybody. But if I come to you and I talk to you with what I say, open mind, open ears, open heart, and open arms, and say, are you having suicidal thoughts? Because I want you to tell me so I can help you. That's almost like relieving the pressure out of a pressure cooker. Absolutely. Because the person now knows they're in a safe space. So I encourage people to ask that question and not be afraid of that question.
That's great. Joe, do you want to comment to this, or do you want to go back to it?
Yeah, I just think it's, also that like you're doing so well fallacy, which often, within a teen especially, belies what's really going on. So I think talking about that safe space, that's cultivated over consistency with the relationship. And I think that establishing a continued running dialogue, not just when you're worried, but even more so when things are okay. And that's not to say that it's likely because something is under the surface, but oftentimes we talk about this as therapists, like that's when you're thinking more clearly, right? So you can really get to work on accessing different coping skills, on just working through tough times and tough thinking when things are going okay. So that's actually this time where you can get a lot of like treatment work done, as opposed to just mitigating and doing crisis management. So yes, definitely speak the words. Mm-hmm.
No, but I liked how you brought up this other piece. When you're asking a question, it's also really important what the follow-up questions are. So if you're asking a question of like, are you thinking about suicide? It's the micro message of like finding a safe place, safe environment to really open up, versus the micro message of, why are you thinking about killing yourself? Because everything's going great in your world, and so it's that you want to be cautious and conscious of kind of how you're presenting, because we don't know individuals' pain. We make assumptions sometimes, and you both brought up amazing examples. On paper, somebody may look like they have their proverbial stuff together, but then it's underlying. And I loved, and it was sad when Robin Williams committed suicide and death by suicide. he had all those posts about this is what suicide looks like after the follow-up, because again, so many people miss that opportunity to see like people with their proverbial stuff together, but then all of a sudden have these underlying pieces. So first, asking questions. The second piece that I always talk about is keeping things safe. And what does that mean? Medications, lock and limit medications. And from a substance abuse perspective, I know this statistic, 83% of kids get exposed to opiates in their own parents' homes. When it comes to leftover pharmacies, leftover pharmaceuticals that are left in the home. So the access point and just locating their medication, knowing what they have is really critical. So again, like I know the best meeting families in the world sometimes forget that they have an extra prescription laying out of anything. So lock and limit medication so they don't have resources right there. If you do have a firearm, having it locked up, and especially during these crises and times when people are thinking about suicide or are in treatment for mental health issues, it's a huge, it is a fact that, firearms are used close to half the time in suicide deaths, and so we want to be really mindful of firearms. And so when it comes to the house, when it comes to our home, when it comes to our offices, watching out for what the environment looks like, if it's safe, and if there's self-injurious behavior of other sorts when it comes to razor blades and that kind of thing, and just not being afraid to make your entire place safe. So Mary Ann, your head was nodding in agreement too. Do you want to expand on what I said, or is that
And what we do know, so again, I know what you're going to hear me say probably a lot is our research says, where we started, AFSP started in 1987 as a research organization where researchers wanted to understand why people die by suicide. And one of the things that we learn is through all this research, all these years, is that if someone decides that they are going to die by suicide and they're going to use a firearm, but they are not able to get to that firearm, that it's locked, it's got a safety on it, then that time sometimes is so important. That 5 minutes or that 10 minutes where they can't get to it, it turns them away from the thought of dying by suicide. So it's not like, well, I can't get to the firearm, but let me go into the medicine cabinet. There's not a secondary way that they're thinking of ending their life. And if you've ever heard anyone that has had a lived experience, the person that comes to mind is Kevin Hines. If you know about Kevin Hines, he is one of the few people that survived jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. And if you've ever heard him speak, I'm actually getting goosebumps. I know Kevin personally, I've heard him speak, and he said the second he jumped, he regretted it and there was no way back. So, it's hard to hear that. I am a survivor of suicide because I lost my son, but I use that as an example because if we can take that time and put that distance between the actual method that the person has chosen, they will not look for another way. That ends that kind of moment for them.
I really do appreciate you pausing there and really getting at that again and again. That idea is that like once they have attempted one particular way, that's a huge component as well. And so it's really critical. Joe, were you going to say anything to that, or is that? Okay, cool. And so when it comes to making things safe, you guys talked about this before, the culture or the way that you can make things feel safe in your own home. A next big proponent of this is just being there, being present in your family's life. If you're seeing signs and symptoms of mental health, it's just hanging out and being and acknowledging it and really just understanding it. And again, I come at this in a humble respect that I don't have all the answers for every client that walks in my room. I've been doing direct clinical care for 25 years. I ask my clients what's happening for them and ask them about their truth and have them share about what's happening from their perspective. Mental health is a disease of perception and perspective as well as a disease of isolation. So any which way to get them into talk to somebody I'll talk to in a second, but just talk with you guys at home and being present and being connected in the home environment. Again, research again shows that time and time again, just talking about suicide doesn't mean they're going to do it. It's only going to prevent it. It's only going to diminish its quality. So them owning the story as opposed to letting their behaviors own the story or talking through the process doesn't give them an opportunity to do it. So again, not being afraid of it is really important. Fourth is a simple thing about help and getting connection. And so many people think if my child or my loved one has a suicidal thing, that means they're going right to a psychiatric unit or right to a hospitalization. And that does happen. But I'm talking about just an independent evaluation. Somebody in the chat already asked how to get in touch with Damien Counseling Services. And we will post all of our contact information. I posted Damien Counseling. I'll put Joe's information up and our information up. And that idea is that, like, getting your child or loved one in for an evaluation doesn't constitute treatment in the respect. Sometimes getting them in to talk to a therapist is just like an introduction to process out what's going on. Sometimes outpatient individual counseling, sometimes intensive outpatient, sometimes residential or psychiatric units are available in the community. But it doesn't mean, so many people think as soon as I mention the word suicidality, I'm going to get hospitalized. It's really suicidality with a plan. It's really suicidality with a plan and a motive and everything kind of lined up. But it's more about getting your child in to talk to somebody and getting them connected and just talking about it. There are 1-800-273-TALK. There are text crisis lines that are available for families and individuals just to talk through it if you think your child has a problem. So again, not being afraid to talk about it is really critical. And there's a bunch of questions that just popped up. So I'm going to wait on these and talk about all these at the end. Is that okay? So I really do appreciate your questions so far. So let me just rattle through my 5 points. I got one more to go. Is what Joe said earlier, is staying connected after the event or staying connected after just the initial outcry. And so many families and individuals say, okay, well, that was then, that happened then, and now we're back to school year. Everybody's back to school year. That was last spring, so everything's fine. But the truth is, this is an ongoing process. This is an ongoing thing that you want to stay and having those doors of communication open. Once somebody's opening up about the suicidality, once somebody opens up about it, they want to continue to talk about it. People need to talk about it and check in about it. And again, just because you're checking in it doesn't mean that they're going to talk, they're going to commit it. Studies have shown suicides goes down as people are talking through it about the risks and about the follow-up. So that's a huge thing. So staying connected and having a lifeline for people. Both your guys' heads were nodding in agreement on that. Do either one of you guys want to comment to that, or is you guys just agree with that? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. Yeah, I also think, again, so we're talking about just the forwarding and the continuing of the connection, but then also you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait until there's a crisis. So, I would argue, as far as like mental health goes, mental health being a primary indicator of suicidal behavior, those depression and ADHD combined is one of the precursors of, that furthers the likelihood of suicidal behavior. So let's dial it back a little bit and talk about, it really comes, the best prevention is helping facilitate with your kids, be it your own children or in the nature of the work that you do, a healthy relationship with aspects of life and death, with disappointments and successes, the recognition of the balance of things, of the accuracy of perception, as far as like, oh, you fail a test, you think you're a failure, I'm no good at anything. Well, what have been some things that I think you've passed some tests, haven't you? How did you get to 8th grade? You must have passed a lot of classes. So what do you think would be, a more accurate way of thinking of yourself? Well, although I failed this test, I've passed a lot. Great, there you go, right? So it's that relationship with disappointment and, and successes and of life and death, and not being afraid to like talk about, like, be sad or to be angry or to talk about, like, sometimes I think about, death and what it's like to be dead without us freaking out as adults, because that shows, right, we're helping to model that this is a safe space where you can talk about these things. And in fact, what's more important to talk about in this life than what it's all about, So I really do believe that if we can establish that healthy foundation, that, that's the deal with great preventative measures, right? We don't see it. You only know about preventive measures that don't work, because they still, the issue still occurs. So anyway, thanks for.
No, that's great. And then Mary Ann, what were you going to say?
I wanted to say that, one of the things that we teach in that conversation, I think somebody said, how do I have that conversation? And it is in our nature as human beings, it's human condition. And take it a step up as parents to want to say something to fix it in the moment, right? So one of the things we talk about is not, so I'm, to use Joe's example, I failed my test. Great way of positioning that, Joe. You failed this test, but how many tests have you passed? Or I broke up with my boyfriend, my girlfriend, and oh my God, I was, this was going to be the one. Well, sometimes our answer is, oh, there's more fish in the sea. You're young, you're handsome. We teach not to do that. We teach to say, not just listen and not give answers or platitudes in the case. Because to say, oh, there's more fish in the sea, or tomorrow there's, it's a new day. What that does to the person that's struggling and in their mind is you're dismissing this pain and this magnitude of this problem. It's, again, I say it a lot, open ears, open heart, open arms, just letting them share their pain and letting them know that you're there. Sometimes just a hug is better than a platitude. Or I've had people call me and talk about someone that they're struggling. I coach them through what they need to say. They go, they do that. A week later, they're calling me, and I'm not laughing. It is so by no means funny, but they're calling me and saying, well, that didn't work. Well, no, it's not. It's a relationship. You have to keep going back and having that conversation so that the person knows that you're there and you're there to catch them. You've got their back. So it may be many conversations. I was very open about mental health with my children from when they were early teens. So it was always a conversation that we had. My children, when they were struggling, I brought them to therapists to help them learn the problem solving and the coping skills that they needed to learn when these traumatic things happened in life, because they happen every day, right? So it's that ongoing conversation.
No, and I appreciate you guys, and I'm going to extrapolate a couple of things what you said, and then answer one of the questions in the Q&A, which I'll get to all of them, I promise. First, the way you both said it is, when you're asking a question to your kids, when you're talking with your kids, the one thing I do want to stress is to be authentic and genuine to yourself. You don't want to try to jump into a therapist mode. You don't want to try to jump in to be something that you're not. It's really about, and so I can't answer this directly for how you are or who you are, but to think about it like this: if your conversations or your flow or your consistency is Wednesday nights you guys come together as a family dinner and that's when you check in, or whatever kind of individual relationship you have with your kids, to lean into those moments, lean into those times. Or if you don't, you want to develop them. And you can start anytime to renegotiate a relationship with your kids and find ways to have conversations and awkward conversations. So again, it's being authentic and genuine. One of the questions that came up, which I thought was amazing, was, all these questions are amazing. So let me first start with the last one: is how important is it that your parents model how they handle difficult situations? And that's a favorite one of mine, in the respect that I learned a lot from my father in his success, but also how he handled failure. Like you talked about it, like people's mistakes or things, how he conducted himself in those times were as critical. So parents are 1,000 school teachers. I know there's a number of school teachers on this call, and I respect your work, especially these last couple of years. But when it comes to emotionality, how kids watch what parents do more than they listen to what you say. So I think it's really critical to how you conduct yourself, how you hold yourself in critical times and difficult times. Not to say that you have to be perfect, you're not going to be, and that's okay, but how you handle the stress and by talking through. Do you guys want to add to that question, or do you think that was good?
I was just thinking of, all the times with my teenage boys throughout the years that I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm just mad. Like, you know what I mean? And, I mean, there are times you get frustrated too as a parent, you yell, but like, even in that moment, to be able to come back and say, you know, uh, that's me, you know what I mean? I've been stressed. I'm sorry. I took it out on you.
Sure, sure.
You know.
No, that's great.
I was fortunate too, because my parents, and so I'm I'm a little bit older than everybody on this call probably, but my parents let me express my feelings to them. It wasn't that children will be heard, not seen, or whatever. I'm saying that backwards. And I just carried that on with to my children. And yes, and a great point, Michael. I am authentic. I was authentic when they were children. I was a single mom. So there were days where the hair was standing on end. But when I saw that and we talked about mommy was mad and I'm sorry. And this is, I was very open. And I think that having that open, honest, being that real person that you make mistakes too, and it's okay. We come together as a family and we get through it is a great foundation.
That's awesome. That's great. I am trying to go back to the questions on the Q&A, and I want to shift gears and kind of go back to these great questions. The first one on the list is from an anonymous attendee. Is there, and I won't use your names, by the way. This is being recorded for other people to see, so I'm never going to use anyone's names. We're just, our names are going to be seen. So when I get to these questions, again, I won't ask your specific names. No one's going to see your names, just for the record. So I do want to remind people that it is being recorded, but only people that weren't able to make it tonight are going to get a copy of this that requested. So is there any research to support whether teen intervention helps prevent suicide, or are there any good educational programs that serve as templates? Absolutely. There's some great stuff out there, and it's on, Marianne sent me some stuff, so I have it on a list of things. I tried to put it in the group text, and now I'm trying to put it in the anonymous. So I'm trying to send privately back to the person a list of them. So if you did get it, please let me know. If not, it'll be posted on our website. So again, Marianne, you have great resources on your website. Joe, you have a couple, and we will put all the stuff on our website tomorrow. So was there anything you guys want to add to that, or?
No, I just have two programs specifically designed for teens. And I have one program specifically designed for college students. And part of the program is for them to understand their, like their mental health and their feelings and what that means, how to advocate for themselves, and then how to identify peer to peer and how they help their peers go to where they have to go for assistance and the resources. So it's a pretty intense program that I can offer virtually or in person.
Yeah, during my years, thanks, Maria. During my years at Valley Forge Military Academy in college, we had a peer educator program for the college students, and I forget the company. And it may be what Mary is talking about, but then they were developing, we're in the process, this is a number of years ago, so I believe it exists, high school curriculum. So it actually became a club where, there is intensive training. And then throughout the course of the academic year, these peer educators would spearhead campaign awarenesses, for safe dates, right? For suicide prevention, of course, and they were out there in the schools, like in the hallways or in the cafeteria with like what they were going through that month. So they were very visible for the other students to see that, like, wow, like, oh, like that's what these guys do, and it was a really, obviously it's for the helping people by heart, they come and want to do it. So they gain something from it. And I think it's an identifiable peer, again, that could make all the difference if it's between that or a teacher, right?
Sure. No, that's great. Thank you. So there's two questions, or actually three questions back to back around school. And so how might suicidal behaviors manifest themselves in the classroom or school setting? Do either one of you guys want to answer it, or do you want me to?
I mean, I have more preventative. So we have a same program. So the program for teens is called More Than Sad, and it's a suicide prevention, introduction to suicide prevention for teachers. It's much more clinical in nature. It's a 2-hour program, but it really does help for teachers, administrators. I've even used it in one school district for the cafeteria staff and the bus drivers, Because think about it, they're hearing things that a teacher's never going to hear, right? In those halls or in that
All the
line.
time. Yep, yep.
And he teaches the educators how to identify and how they work with the administrators within the guidelines of a school setting.
Yep.
We also have a school model suicide prevention policy that sets up you can create using the model, you can use how you set your mental health plan for your school. And then unfortunately, as much as this breaks my heart, the back part of that plan is what do you do if you should experience a suicide in your school district. So we have a lot of resources to support. I do use More Than Sad with the Philadelphia School District. I just finished training some of their counselors to be able to train that program to their teachers.
Which is amazing. And you're right that the school kind of has its own confines of how much they can do, what they can intervene. Schools have come a long way. I have a ton of respect, as Joe mentioned, for the school counseling system, TE, Christine Dunleavy High, with what you guys have done and how you guys are handling things. And again, I give you a ton of respect for the SAP model that's in existence in Pennsylvania. A lot of folks don't understand that, but it is a multitude of eyes. It's not just relying upon one counselor or one person. SAP meetings draws from a lot of different people. So again, when it comes to the school setting, I always look at it's not just the teacher, it's not just one person, it's a culmination of a lot of different pieces of information that we're putting together pieces of a puzzle. So I don't want to put the pressure on you guys, but not being afraid to say something to the right person on the school setting so they can understand. So the same person asked another great question. What do mental health look like in younger children versus older children? And who would like to answer that, or do you want me to? Great.
We have 43 programs, so I'm trained in most of them. We just launched a new program. It's called Gizmo Mental Health Pausing, and it's the cutest little black and white fluffy little puppy, and it's a read along, and it's for 5 to 10-year-olds, and we read along with them at libraries or in school, and it talks about what in their language, what this means. If you're feeling this means this. And then at the end, we have an activity plan or a mental health plan, and the children get to fill this out. And if they complete it, if they get halfway, they get a little gizmo for their backpack. But if they complete it, they actually get a stuffed animal. And it really teaches them in their language what feelings mean and how to express them in a way that is meaningful to a trusted adult. So we use that for 5 to 10. And then our other programs kick in for the teens, like More Than Sad and It's Real for teens.
Thank you so much. And Joe, were you going to say something?
You may, if you like.
Yeah, I was just going to add that idea that like when it comes to kids, and you're right on target, a lot of it is around education, around identifying what their feelings are. So it's a lot of getting to their level of understanding what their feelings are, and a lot of education about connecting the dots for what's they're feeling, sad, or there's a spectrum of emotion. So it's a lot of connecting the dots around that. There's a lot of great play therapists in the area to have them act through and walk through. So a lot of times just sitting in a therapist's office, a lot of times parents sit across from a 5-year-old and say, I don't want to drag my kid to a therapist. But there's a lot that play therapy does, and a lot of activities that kids and adolescent therapists do, and child specific therapists do to really engage a kid really well. So that's all I was going to say, Joe.
Yeah. So here at Peter's Place, we run peer support groups for kids ages 4 through 18, and then young adult, but we're talking about kids. So 4 to 6, 7 to 10, 11 to 13s being more in that age, especially 4 to 6, 7 to 10s. And, play is their work. That's what it is. And, it's not to be directed or forced. It's to be encouraged, right, and reflected upon. And the task there, right, is seeing through color, seeing through physical expression, seeing through play with others. What is stirring in that little person, you know? So again, like mental health issues in children, what do they look like? That being the question. It's a range, right? There isn't that one thing, and it's a persistent thing over time. A lot of diagnostic criteria for ADHD, depression, things of that nature require a child to be a little bit older before considering that. Just recognizing the tumult and how much is happening from kids ages 2 to 10, 2 to 12. So if you're there and a consistent presence and paying attention, then you can certainly, again, play therapy. I would advocate for that, of course. But there's nothing necessarily that you'll see in a small child that is just like, that's what that is, right? So but again, just reinforcing play therapy.
That's awesome. A follow-up question, Marianne, somebody had is, can you name the program that was for kids from 5 to 10 years old? What was the name of that?
It's called Gizmo Mental Health Possum. So I think that at the end of this, the resources, my contact information will be on there.
Yep.
You can reach out to me. We can talk about how we get that set up for your school, your library, your scout troop, whatever. And all of our programs, most of our programs are offered free of charge.
Thank you so much. A tough question that I wanted to ask, that somebody asked, was, is there a connection between ADHD and suicide? And I see it, and you guys talked about it in the respect that it may be a factor, but there's not a direct correlation causation. A lot of times other diagnoses that Marianne talked about in her definition of what is at risk, when we look for risk factors, ADHD absolutely is a risk factor when it comes to a young kid in school that's having a really hard time managing stress and the day-to-day kind of functioning. So if it's an acute case of ADHD, a lot of times it's the depressive symptomology, it's the anxiety symptomology that are the drivers to the suicidality. In fact, once we kind of unravel the symptom, we get back to the core issue of ADHD. So do you guys want to go off on that at all, or is that
yeah, I mean, along with the decision making, that's what's happening there, right? So you don't have that. It's the reason why when a teen is in the car with more than one friend, that they do stupid things, and that's been shown time and time. That's part of the reason why the law is you can only have so many kids in your car, unless you're of a certain age. So IQ really, when they're together, it divides itself, but any organic, issue, concern, with that prefrontal cortex is going to involve decision making, and poor or poorly thought through decisions are made. When that happens.
That was a great way to say it. You were actually doing this, and I just want to highlight the frontal lobe of the brain, the development of the brain, no joke, that's what we're talking about. And so kids are going to make mistakes. Kids are going to be impulsive. And there's this whole other diagnosis called adolescence that we have to talk about, that it's normal and natural for kids just to be kids and to be impulsive and to get into trouble, to do things and experiment. And in my world, what I've seen a lot is the experimentation of substances that roll into an early exposure for addiction. But the same goes true for like that decisional process train, and then it leads to all these other things, and that's where kids feel alone and isolated. So again, just because a kid's ADHD doesn't mean their suicidality in the future. It means it's a factor that we really need to kind of keep on our discussion plate. So thank you. Here's a tough one for you guys. Well, first, the person said, thank you for all the information. So I thank you for that. Are there any differences due to culture, age, income, examples of lower income families, or more likely to discuss or not discuss, or certain cultures more inclined to or less inclined to ask for help? Would you guys like to answer this, or do you want me to? Great.
I can jump in. Right now we are doing, AFSP National is doing a lot of work around looking at the various cultures across our country, because we're in all 50 states. So looking at the Black community, there's so many factors that play into that, such as religious factors, the stigma that comes with it, and the ability and the access to therapy and mental health care. And then take that even one step further. Dig into that. Is there there's not enough um, therapists in the Black community? So, I could sit there as a white, I'm not a therapist, but I could sit there as a white woman talking to a Black man, and we're like, I don't understand I don't walk in his shoes. So we're really trying to put a lot of our research into understanding how do we make that better, and take that one step further. How do we become part of the solution in helping people in the Black community become therapists, or in the, Latinx community? That's another community. They've got a lot of, religious stigma that comes around that. Or, going out to the Midwest, we have the, all the different cultures, the American Indians, and all of that. And we've got to really look at it. And, right now, 2020 CDC suicide rates are out. There's been a decline. I know most people look at me and go, really? But what we don't know is, where did that decline come from? Did it come from a Caucasian population, but we're seeing a rise in African American? So we won't see those numbers till probably 2021. But yes, it does come into play. Do you have access to mental health? Do you have the right type of mental health support in your community, whatever that looks like? So all those factors do come into play. American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is certainly trying to help with that. We have advocacy, we have all this research. So I don't mean to take up all everybody's time, but it is a passion of mine. So mental health for all.
No, I agree. Thank you. Joe, would you want to add to that, or?
Sure. And that's not even talking about diet, access to nourishing food and the role that plays developmentally over time. Age, of course, there are, two areas where it's not the number, but it's the proportion pop a little bit. One is the 15 to 24, 30-year-old age range. And we're talking about, not only is there a lot of hormonal stuff, but also maybe that prefrontal stuff is not fully developed, the role of ADHD, major depression, things like that, as the onset of mood disorders takes place right around there, predominantly. And then you have it later in life around like 65, when, it could be said that people are, kind of questioning their productivity in life now. And, looking back on like, what is my role here, in this world? I can't work. I can't, so, age definitely at different, eras has their own thing, but, those two ages have popped a bit, in addition to ethnicity and region, just region's different. So all of those are contributing factors, I would say, for sure.
One of the things I was lucky to be involved with, my wife is a national director of a program called Charlie Health, and they have locations in 11 states. And what's interesting is it's an all telehealth program. So accessing help is now just via this. So there are access points. We are breaking through some of these barriers to get people into treatment, get people help, or get somebody seen by a therapist, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Somebody nicely put this in a couple places, and I'm sorry I didn't get to this yet. The person wrote, I volunteer at my local church and student ministry, mainly in high school students. I do what I can to highlight my mental health journey with some of my students, and to be on social media, sometimes live. What can I do to make the church a safe place for students to admit that they are not okay, and to ensure that these students get personalized or evidence-based care when they need help to address it? That was a great question. And I apologize I didn't get to that yet. So Mary Ann is jumping at this, so let me just turn it over to her.
Well, we have a couple things that I can offer. We have what we call Soul Shop, and it is a suicide prevention educational program designed specifically for clergy. because sometimes, and I'm Roman Catholic, so I've had my own issues where the clergy is not open. And I can tell you some really, I was fortunate I didn't have that, but I can tell you some stories. Um, so we teach, it's non-denominational, it doesn't matter. We teach you as a as part of the clergy, how do you engage and embrace your community and your congregation to help them. And then the other part to that is for those young adults or those young people. If you reach out to me, we can certainly create a education prevention plan where we either come to the church or do it virtually. I am working with a church out in Pottstown, and we're creating a series. So more than sad for parents, more than sad for teens, and just general knowledge and information at the entire level of the congregation. So I'd be more than happy to have that conversation and start to organize with you.
And I imagine that weaving in that program, one of Marianne's programs, with just like a normalization thing, like because that's part of that, right? Is establishing the relationship with the conversation where it's not something to be afraid of, where it's an open dialogue, where there's a safe space to have it. So, perhaps again, weaving in that plan, maybe week one, it's on, talking about suicide. And then the next week it's about I don't know, sports or music, and then you go and you're just moving around and you're demonstrating that this is okay to talk about, and it's part of what we should be talking about on a consistent basis.
No, I think that's great. And that's what I was going to say. It's just interweaving it into a part of a curriculum. So it's not just, okay, now we're going to do this. And now I do prevention talks at high schools or middle schools where the best ones that I've seen work is it's just a part of the process. It's not like this, okay, this week we're going to talk about this. It's trickled in throughout. And again, I appreciate the gentleman or the person that said that they asked the question. They said that they try to put it on social media and everything else. And I thought that was really cool too. That, again, using the venue that kids respond to, using the venue that they speak to. So social media being one of it. So they see other things out there. I've had clients come into me, and I'm not on TikTok. I'm not a huge fan of TikTok for a lot of reasons, but they'll come in and there's a lot of mental health on TikTok and discussions around it. So I think that's so vital to kind of have it as a part of the conversation, just like social media that they're in their lives. So somebody asked, was there or is there any connection between suicidality and autism? And at first glance, what I always think is that autistic person that I've worked with and folks that I've worked with, it's a feeling, an extra feeling of isolation. It's an extra feeling, an extra factor to look out for. But again, it's in that category of factors to look out for as a sign or symptom of that isolation and disconnection, but not necessarily a causation of suicidality. So I don't want to have any families walk out of here worried about that, but there is a sign of that. So Marianne or Joe, would you want to comment more on that?
No, exactly. Thanks.
Okay. So here we're left with a couple of the really tough ones. So here we go with the tough ones. This is the next one. How do you counsel the survivors who are left behind following the relative suicide? How do we talk to the loved ones? How do we tell and open up our hearts, and how do we be there for them? I guess Marianne was jumping, and then I'll let Joe, and so please go right ahead.
So I talked about our founding principle of 1987 being research. The other one was people like myself. So think about 1987. Would you have even said the word? If you did, you whispered it.
Yeah, right.
Right? And people stepped away from you. I've had people step away from me when I share my story. But so because of that, we had a group of people that came together who were survivors and said, that's it, we're done. We want to talk about our loved ones. We want to be out there. My son died by suicide. It's like he died by cancer, let's say. So what I say is we were created by EQ and IQ. Researchers and survivors came together. And since that time, we have created what we call Loss and Healing. And we have trained volunteers that are survivors, that when we've when we get outreach from a newly bereaved family, what we do is we send a care package to them that includes resources. It's a book by Jack Jordan about how do you cope with suicide loss. We also send, if there's children, we send some materials and resources that you can use to help for the children. And then we reach out. We will have a conversation about the journey. And we always match. So if someone lost a child, then we have other trained volunteers that have lost a child. So you're similar. And we just talk about our journey, and we share the resources that are out there, whether it's we have a number of clinicians that have been trained for suicide bereavement specifically. We partner with many groups, suicide of survivors groups, where if you want to be in a group, we have many of those available. And really the work that we do, our walk that's coming up on October 3rd, will bring together a community of survivors. And what that does for you as a survivor is you find ways to connect, you find ways to share your loved one's story, and you find a way that there is hope and there is healing. And as long as we're together, we can find that way. And I always tell people, there is no magic words. There are none. I can tell you how many times I've said there are no words in my lifetime, but it's being there. It's just like being there for someone that's struggling. Open heart, open mind, open ears, open arms. Just let them know you're there and that you want to help them through this time. And it's a piece of you is missing, a piece of me is missing. But I found my healing through doing this work.
Thank you. That was amazing. Joe.
Thank you, Marianne. So, I mean, it really does all start with understanding what's going on with you. You can't be there with for another if, you know, the story hits close to home, and all of a sudden now you're reacting to your own stuff. And that's what a lot of us do when we talk about, you know, big confusing things such as death by suicide. And that's where platitudes come from, because it's a very safe thing to say, to, you know, just say and scurry away real quick. So understanding your relationship with grief and with suicide specifically, as we're talking about this tonight, is important. And, you know, are you able to say that word? Are you able to sit with the sadness and the anger that may come, or are you seeking to take that away, to stop that, right, to make it better? So, you know, to echo what Marianne said, it's not a thing to say or to do, but it's a way to be, right? It is completely a way to be. Now, I guess I'll give you a practical. So there are a number of grief models, and one of them is a dual process model, which is that grieving individuals kind of move back and forth, both being in their grief and then tending to the things that they need to tend to. Like, you know what I mean? I gotta get the life insurance, you know, figured out. I gotta, you know, still take a shower. Like, you know, I gotta get back to work eventually, right? And it's this back and forth, right? So if you're ever curious about like ways to offer support, just think about those two spheres. And, you know, you want to offer support like, oh, let me know if you need, I'm here for you if you want to talk, right? And if they're like, no, I'm okay, and respect where they're at and say, well, can I pick your kid up? Let me go to the grocery store for you. Is that okay if I do something like that? Because now you're on that other sphere. So offer it in both. Don't just try to like double down on like, you know, no, let me do this for you. It's like, what if they need to be at the grocery store? What if they want that 10 minutes just quiet to themselves to just like take a breath? And you're like, no, stay here in your house. You know, so perhaps if you offer the grocery run and they say, no, really, I need to go, all right, well, give me a call later and let me know if you want to talk. Now you're offering it on the other end, right? So just think of those two spheres and offering very practical things in those two.
That was amazing. And I so appreciate you bringing up those both spheres, because as the therapist in me, I want to be the emotional available one. I want to know what the right thing is to say, as Marianne said. And, sometimes that emotionality is really important, and that being able to be present and be thoughtful. But sometimes that's strategic, tactful, like, hey, can I pick your kid up? Or hey, can I drop them off? Or hey, can I drop off groceries or whatever, is as powerful or more powerful sometimes. Just, again, that presence and that being able to be available. So for the loved one in the community or in your family, it's being available, being present, waiting for that right opportunity, that right conversation to happen, not forcing it. So my only added kind of comment is grief is a process. Grief is a process and different and unique for ages. So some kids, there's a little bit of a delay sometimes, where kids will process a year, 2 years later, and all of a sudden it'll hit them sideways. Or adults sometimes, even that same way, may go into substance abuse, or may go into workaholism, or may go out of looking at their own stuff, and it may not hit them till later in life, the grief and loss. So they might not be ready, or might get interrupted. So know that when a tragedy, when a trauma happens at this level in the community, in the individual family, there's no timestamp. There's no like, we've got to investigate, fix, and move on. This is a lifelong presence that someone has left a huge imprint on our lives and our souls. That's not going away. So how we process it, how we contain it, how we hold their spirit in our lives, and how we share that with others and ourselves, and how we're there for other people, from the practical, which I so appreciate you bringing up, Joe, and just being able to be the dogmatic present to run around, to the emotionality, again, and not having all the answers. But again, having those ears and those open arms, as Marianne talked about, just to be present for the opportunity to listen. That's what I really think. Marianne.
And if I can jump in, Mike, I'm 11 years out, but there are days when it feels like yesterday. And one of the things I tell people when they ask me this question is, just because it's 10 years or 20 years, if you just reaching out every once in a blue moon for just random, hey, how are you? I have friends that'll just reach out and say, hey, I saw you on an interview or television, and I'm just, my heart, because I know Dominic is so proud of you. Like that lights me up, because he's not forgotten.
That's huge. That's huge. And that leads to an additional question that popped up. I do have one other one, but this one that came up is, any advice to how to attend to or specifically be present for grown children who had a parent die of suicide a number of years ago? And Marianne, you answered it. What I was trying to get across is, it's not a timestamp. It is a process. So periodically bringing up their lives, their pieces, how they affected us, periodically checking in and not being afraid to ask the question, how are you feeling? Does it come up at all? Sometimes it's anniversaries. Sometimes it's not the actual anniversary, but it's a different kind of anniversary of sorts, a graduation of a high school when everybody else is. I dealt with this a lot last year, where a lot of parents were going to graduation parties, and they were like, I wish my son or my daughter was going to a graduation. So those types of anniversaries of sorts, when there's normal things that happen. This fall, when a lot of kids went off to college, some kids didn't, or some parents didn't have that opportunity to have their kids go to college because of that loss in their home. So that's those times where the absence of presence, that ambiguous loss, that's, is definitely another critical time to think about. So, Marianne, what were we going to say? I'm sorry.
It's graduation. My son was 20, but it's now where my other two daughters are adults, and I have two granddaughters, and those moments where that bittersweet, because I know he would just take those little girls and just be an incredible uncle. And there are moments when we're doing stuff and I'm like, if he were here, and I break down. And I have friends that are very mindful of that. And I so appreciate, like, oh, that, Dominic would just be like tossing Frankie in the air, my granddaughter. So think of those things for your adult children that have lost a parent, or anyone in your life. And that's grief, I think, overall. But especially, we talk about say their name. I want to hear my son's name as often as I can. I want to say his name because again, it's that connection that he has not forgotten.
No, thank you. Um, Last question that has come up, and we'll have time for one of the more. How do you deal with a situation where one parent is authentic or genuine, but the other parent is not? Do you communicate that some people are not well equipped and others to deal with the situation? My visceral, quick reaction is, as a therapist, family therapist, systems, I try not to have one parent talk bad about the other. So if it's coming across like, it's all in the presentation, it's all how you communicate it, but you don't want to speak badly about the other parent that's going through their own process of how they handle it, or vice versa. So we want to just try to say, like, they're working with the best information that they have at their time. When I sit across from families every day, I respect where everybody's coming in with their own level of insight, their own level of education, their own experience level, and either culturally or just life, they don't have that bandwidth to kind of talk through these awkward conversations. So no judgment. I just, again, ask how it's presented. That's my only critical thing, if that makes sense. And what do you guys think about it?
Yeah, one of my immediate thoughts to the visceral reaction was, like one of my friends is a surgeon. It's like, I could never cut someone open, like just never, like it's not within me. And then, working here with grief and loss and death, people are like, how do you do that? I could never do that. And it's like, we're in different places. We have different skill sets or
Sure.
wherewithals, and
Yep.
I don't know, it just is what it is, I guess, to a degree.
No, that's great. Mary Ann, do you want to add to that, or is that pretty me? So,
Now, I think that's how I would handle it when somebody asks me that question, because you see it, one parent is accepting or working through it and the other parent is struggling with it, but more quiet. So I agree. Just meet the person where they are and explain, no judgment, that this is how they're processing.
great. The other question that popped up, Marty, I'm sorry, real quick, before you chime in. Somebody said, I have a preteen on the spectrum, which he's upset. He would say he hates himself at times, or calls himself an idiot. Sometimes he might say, I want to hurt myself. Any places I can reach out to get someone to prevent this type of thoughts getting worse? So again, getting your preteen into counseling, if they're voicing those thoughts, are great. Damien Counseling, we have the director on right here, Marty, or when it comes to Peter's Place, or there's so many resources in our community to get your child in for if they're having thoughts or statements like that. But again, like what we talked about, just being there, being present, non-judgmental, just questioning, having that questioning mind, and being inquisitive and inviting to have more conversations around what's going on. Is there something going on? Sometimes it's coming out of self-anger or self-loathing, but what else is happening underneath the surface? So getting them to talk, if not into a therapy setting, is really critical. Or Joe, would you want to comment on
Yeah,
that?
I mean, it could very well be, at least in my experience. So for the most part, what are you trying to say? Like, what are you really saying? What are some different ways that we could say it? What are some avenues of expression? And it doesn't have to look verbal. We want to be very adultify, intellectual, verbal. That's not where they're at. And so, if we want to sit down in a chair across from them and stare at them and say, like, tell me how you feel, it's like, so I would research, or even if you connect with therapists that have the ability to return your phone call, apologies, it's just a rough landscape right now, they would be happy, and I would be as well, because we do a lot of activities here, to just give some basic ideas for craft activities that you could do at home, books that you could read that connect feelings with colors, with behaviors, and perhaps facilitating that would improve his ability to express more specifically what's going on, and then to ask for what he needs, which is important too. So but certainly get with a therapist too, and look into that aspect as well. That would be I think a good first step. But then I'm here as well on the side at home, if there are things that you can do to help facilitate conversation at home too.
Thank you so much. Before I turn it back over to Marty, I want to thank everybody for A, showing up tonight, B, the panelists, C, all your questions were amazing. And I couldn't have done this tonight without, we had prepared a couple, but you guys brought some amazing questions. So I can't thank everybody for voicing them and putting them out there. So thank you so much for your participation so far. So Marty, did you want to end on anything or say
I
anything?
just want to close by saying what a fantastic community we have. The response tonight, the response by the panelists who donated their time in preparation and in presenting tonight. The teachers, the different organizations, the board members who have shown up as attendees this evening. I think this speaks so highly of our wonderful community. So I want to thank you and to let you know that each of these organizations is here to help you. And we have the resources on a sheet that we will get to you one way or another. And you are always welcome to call each one of us, and we'll point you in the right direction. So thank you for your time tonight. It was a pleasure to be with you, and I'm so grateful. Good night.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
You too.